By the time Lady Cassandra Ashbourne reached her 27th year, she had acquired more reputations than gowns. In the drawing rooms of the capital, where fans fluttered like nervous birds and opinions were poured as freely as wine, she was called the Ashbourne Enigma, the realm's reluctant rose, and by those less kind, the lady who would not wed. To herself, she was simply Cassandra, a woman who refused to promise her life to a man who did not truly see her. The spring ball at the royal pavilion glittered against the night like a cluster of captured stars. Chandeliers spilled golden light over silks and satins in every shade of blossom and sky. Musicians coaxed bright, nimble notes from violins, and the air was thick with the scent of orange blossoms and beeswax polish. Cassandra stood near one of the tall, arched windows, her pale blue gown echoing the deepening evening beyond the glass. She wore no jewels save a modest string of pearls at her throat and a silver comb, once her mother's, set carefully in her dark hair. Her posture was calm, her gaze steady, as though she were observing a play rather than standing on its stage. "Lady Cassandra," murmured Miss Clara Whittaker at her side, tapping her fan lightly against her wrist. "Lord Fernley has already inquired whether you might favor him with a dance this evening." "And what did you tell him?" Cassandra asked, a hint of amusement touching her lips. "That he might ask you himself," Clara replied. "I have no desire to deprive a man of the opportunity to be politely refused. It builds character." Cassandra's soft laugh quickly faded. She knew what the tongue whispered, that she enjoyed turning men away, that she thought herself above them, that she was too proud, too odd, too demanding. The truth was, quieter than gossip aloud. Each proposal she had received so far had been wrapped in land, title, and convenience, with little room left for her thoughts, her hopes, her heart. She had watched her mother's gentle spirit diminish in a marriage where her ideas were treated as charming but inconsequential, her voice more decoration than influence. Cassandra had been barely out of the schoolroom when she knelt by a sickbed scented with lavender and regret and silently vowed she would not repeat that story, not even to secure Ashbourne Manor. Her father, Lord Ashbourne, managed their thinning estates with tired dignity. They were not ruined, but neither were they secure. A good match for his only daughter would do more than ease his ledgers. It would quiet the pitying looks he endured from his peers. Yet he had never pressured her, only folded ledgers with slow, careful hands and looked at Cassandra as though she were both his comfort and his unsolvable riddle. "Here he comes," Clara whispered. "Brace yourself. Lord Fernley approaches with the air of a man marching into battle." Cassandra watched Lord Fernley make his way through the crowd. He was not unkind nor unpleasant, but when he spoke to her, his words circled around acreage, bloodlines, and the suitability of their combined properties. He rarely asked what she read, what music she preferred, or what she thought of the new schools being established in the northern provinces. "Lady Cassandra," he said, bowing before her, his cheeks already tinged with pink, "might I have the honor of the next dance?" She hesitated for a heartbeat. One dance would cost her little, and it would certainly please her father. Yet she knew how easily a single dance became a hopeful narrative, how quickly polite steps on a polished floor could turn into expectations and quiet pressure. "I thank you, my lord," she replied gently, "but I am not dancing this evening." The familiar shadow of disappointment crossed his face before he masked it with a courteous smile. He bowed again and retreated. Clara sighed. "You will force the poets of the realm to earn their ink," her friend murmured, all unrequited admiration and tragic sighs. "I wish no one pain," Cassandra answered softly. "It is kinder to say no now than to pretend I might someday say yes." Across the ballroom, whispers stirred like a mild breeze through leaves. She could feel glances prick at her back, assessing, speculating. Still, she lifted her chin a fraction, breathing in the orange blossom air, holding fast to the quiet promise she had made years ago. She would not barter away her peace of mind for a title or security. The orchestra began a new waltz, sweeping couples eagerly to the floor. Clara was quickly claimed by a cheerful young officer, leaving Cassandra alone by the window, a solitary patch of blue amid the swirl of color. Then the herald's voice rang out above the music, clear and resonant. His Grace, Sebastian Thorne, Duke of Evermere. The name moved through the crowd like a spark. Conversations faltered, fans stilled, and every head turned. The Duke of Evermere, second only to the crown in influence, was rarely seen at such festivities. Rumor portrayed him as reserved, formidable, more at home in council chambers than in ballrooms. Cassandra watched as he entered, tall, impeccably dressed in black and silver, dark hair just beginning to show a dignified touch of grey at the temples. His cool grey gaze swept the room, not with arrogance, but with measured awareness, as though cataloguing details for some quiet, internal ledger. He spoke briefly with the king, exchanged a few words with key ministers, and then, to Cassandra's astonishment, began walking directly toward her. The crowd seemed to ripple aside, forming an unspoken path from the entrance to her window. Her heart gave a small, unfamiliar leap. When he reached her, he bowed with precise courtesy, as if every inch of it was intentionally given, not casually bestowed. "Lady Ashbourne," he said, his voice low and even, "I am told you value honesty above flattery. Permit me to be honest. I have come to this ball for only one purpose." She met his gaze carefully. "And what purpose is that, Your Grace?" His eyes did not waver. "To ask you," he replied, "for just one dance." The music swelled behind them, and the room seemed to hold its breath as Cassandra's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her fan. For the first time in many seasons, the refusal she knew by heart did not immediately rise to her lips. Cassandra's fingers tightened around the ivory sticks of her fan. The familiar words hovered on her tongue, ready to shield her as they always had. "I am not dancing this evening." They had become a quiet armor, a way to keep distance between herself and expectations she could not bear to fulfill. But as she held the Duke of Evermere's steady grey gaze, something in that well-rehearsed response felt suddenly too wrong, too habitual, too small for the moment unfolding before her. "I confess, Your Grace," she said at last, her voice remarkably calm despite the quickening of her heart, "I am not in the habit of accepting such invitations." "So I have heard," he replied, the faintest suggestion of humor stirring at the corner of his mouth. "It is, if I may be frank, one of the reasons I wish to ask you." "You enjoy a challenge?" she asked, arching a brow. "Not a challenge," he said, "a rarity. You are a woman who says no when the world expects you to say yes. That alone would make you interesting, but it is the manner in which you say it that intrigues me more." "The manner?" "You refuse with kindness," he answered, yet with no room left for doubt. "I imagine it is a difficult balance to maintain." Her lips parted in surprise. No one had ever described her refusals so precisely. They called her cold or proud, never careful or kind. For a moment, Cassandra felt oddly exposed, as if he had seen through a veil she had almost forgotten she wore. "You have been paying a great deal of attention, Your Grace," she said, attempting lightness. "When the fate of the realm depends upon reading men's intentions and character," he replied, "one learns to observe. Occasionally, one notices a lady instead." A faint warmth touched her cheeks. Across the room she caught a glimpse of her father. Lord Ashbourne stood very still, his eyes fixed on her and the Duke, his expression carefully composed. She knew him well enough to see the slight tension at his jaw, the hope and worry twisting quietly beneath his calm. "If I accept," Cassandra said softly, "this room will talk of nothing else until the next scandal distracts them. Then we shall give them honest material." "For their gossip," Sebastian said. "One dance, no more unless you wish it, no less if you grant it." The music swelled around them. Cassandra drew in a breath that tasted of orange blossom and candle smoke. For years she had guarded herself with an iron certainty. Yet what harm could there be in a single dance freely chosen, with a man who had at least taken the trouble to understand why she so often said no? "One dance, Your Grace," she said, at last. "Only one. It must be understood that it promises nothing further." His bow was deeper this time, not in triumph, but in respect. "Only one," he agreed. "I would not dare demand more than you willingly offer." He extended his hand. Cassandra placed her gloved fingers in his, noticing the warmth and steadiness of his grasp. As he led her toward the center of the room, conversation faltered, then rose again in a new, sharper tone. The crowd parted as if they were the eye of some modest storm. They took their places as the waltz reached its heart. His hand rested at her waist with measured propriety, guiding but not claiming. Their joined hands rose, forming the familiar arch between them. "You dance often, Your Grace?" she asked, seeking to ease the strange flutter in her chest. "Not if I can help it," he replied mildly. "I am far more comfortable with treaties and maps. But, now and then, circumstances require that I remember which foot goes where." To her surprise, he moved with quiet competence. He did not seek to dazzle or display, but he was attentive, always aware of her balance, her pace. There was a sort of consideration in his movements that made it easier for her to relax into the pattern of the dance. After a few turns, he spoke again. "I have heard that you support the new academies in the northern provinces." Her eyes flicked up to his. "You have heard correctly, though most people find the subject too dull for a ballroom." "Most people," he said, "have never read the reports of what happens to villages where children grow up with no education at all. I have. I am curious what you think might be improved." The question lit something inside her. The music, the crowd, even her own nervousness slipped slightly out of focus as she answered. "The intention is admirable," Cassandra said, "but enthusiasm alone does not sustain a school. The masters are overworked and underpaid. Supplies are irregular. If the crown truly wishes the academies to last, there must be a long-term plan, not simply a burst of generosity because it seems fashionable." He listened without interruption, his gaze never drifting over her shoulder in search of someone more important. His questions were precise, not flattering, and for the first time in many seasons, Cassandra felt as though she were being treated not as an ornament, but as a mind, as a partner in thought, if nothing else. When the final notes of the waltz shimmered into silence, they slowed to a graceful halt near the edge of the floor. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, her breath a touch unsteady. "You have kept your bargain. One dance only. For tonight," he answered quietly. "Tomorrow is another matter." "Tomorrow?" He glanced briefly toward her father, whose gaze had never left them. "If you consent," Sebastian said, "I intend to call upon Lord Ashbourne. There are matters I wish to discuss with him, matters that concern his estates and his daughter." Cassandra felt the floor steady beneath her slippers, yet the world seemed to tilt all the same. Somewhere behind the poised mask of her father's expression, she sensed a secret she did not yet understand. Morning crept across Ashbourne Manor in pale, hesitant light, as if the day itself were unsure what it would bring. Cassandra sat at the small breakfast table in her father's study, a cup of untouched tea cooling at her elbow, a slice of toast slowly turning dry on her plate. The house was unusually restless. Footsteps passed more often in the corridor. The butler appeared twice to inquire whether Lord Ashbourne would prefer fresh flowers in the front hall. One of the maids dropped a tray in the kitchen, sending a clatter echoing faintly through the old stone. Everyone had heard the news. "The Duke of Evermere," her father said at last, folding the morning's correspondence with careful fingers, "has requested the honor of calling upon us at 11. Cassandra glanced toward the clock on the mantel. The hands crept inexorably toward the appointed hour. "So soon," she murmured. "Apparently," Lord Ashbourne replied. "He is not a man who likes to waste time." He tried for a light tone, but Cassandra heard the strain beneath it. His dark hair was threaded more generously with grey than it had been a year ago, and this morning he seemed to carry some invisible weight in his shoulders. "Papa," she said gently, "did you know he would ask to call?" For a moment, Lord Ashbourne did not answer. Then he set the letters aside and looked at her with tired tenderness. "I knew," he said slowly, "that His Grace had made certain inquiries about our position. I did not know he would dance with you in the middle of the royal pavilion, sending every tongue in the capital into a frenzy." A faint smile touched his mouth and faded. "But I knew he was interested in Ashbourne." "In Ashbourne," Cassandra repeated. "Not necessarily in me." Her father's gaze softened. "My dear, a man may be interested in both." She looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. "Is there something I ought to know?" Lord Ashbourne drew in a breath, then shook his head. "There are only the usual truths. The estate has seen better days, and a powerful friend could help turn its fortunes, but no promise has been given, and none will be given without your consent. Nothing has been decided behind closed doors." The words soothed part of her, and yet left another part restless. At 5 minutes before 11, Cassandra stood at the window of the front drawing-room. The long drive lay like a pale ribbon between the hedges. A thin mist lingered in the low fields beyond, blurring the edges of the world. She heard the distant rumble of wheels before she saw the carriage crest, black and polished, the Evermere crest glinting on its door. The horses moved with a disciplined grace that reminded her of their master's steps in the waltz. "He comes then," Lord Ashbourne said quietly beside her. "Yes," Cassandra replied. "He does." Minutes later, Sebastian Thorne, Duke of Evermere, was ushered into the drawing-room. The morning light suited him better than the chandelier's glow had. His features seemed less severe, his eyes clearer, though the impression of restraint remained. He bowed to Lord Ashbourne, then to Cassandra, with that same deliberate courtesy she recalled from the night before. "Lord Ashbourne, Lady Cassandra, thank you for receiving me at such short notice." "Your Grace," her father replied. "Ashbourne is honored." They exchanged the expected pleasantries. Tea was poured. Comments were made about the drive, the weather, the promising state of the spring planting. But beneath the smooth surface, something brisk and purposeful hummed like a current under calm water. At last, Lord Ashbourne set his cup aside. "You mentioned in your note that you wished to discuss matters of business, Your Grace." "I did," the Duke said. His gaze shifted briefly to Cassandra, then back to her father. "If you permit, my lord, I would speak of both land and more personal concerns. I see no reason to pretend they are not connected, though I will not tangle them in a way that removes anyone's choice." Cassandra's heart gave a small jump at that last word. Choice. Let us begin with the land, Lord Ashbourne said. My daughter knows our affairs almost as well as I do. She may remain. The Duke inclined his head, apparently unsurprised. Very well. He outlined in clear and economical language his interest in the northern provinces and the academies being built there. Some of the proposed routes for new roads, he explained, would pass near Ashbourne land. If managed properly, such changes could restore prosperity to regions that had languished for decades. I believe Ashbourne could become a key point, he said. Your lands may be strained, my lord, but they occupy a strategic position. I would invest in your tenant farms, finance improvements, and support the establishment of a model academy nearby. The benefits would be mutual. It is a generous offer, Lord Ashbourne said cautiously. It is a practical one, Sebastian replied. I am no hero, my lord. I seek arrangements that strengthen both sides. All through the conversation, Cassandra listened. She asked a handful of questions about the terms of the investment, the rights of their tenants, the long-term obligations. Each time the Duke answered directly without condescension, as though he had expected her to be involved. At length, Lord Ashbourne leaned back in his chair with a slow exhale. I will need time to consider the details, of course, but I am inclined to look favorably upon such an arrangement. As I hoped, Sebastian said. He then turned, fully this time, to Cassandra. And now, if I may, I would speak of the personal concerns I mentioned. Only if Lady Cassandra is willing. Her pulse stumbled. I am listening, Your Grace. Lord Ashbourne rose. I will leave you for a few moments, he said. I must look in on some papers in the study. You know where to find me should you need me. Cassandra wanted to protest, to ask him to stay, but the words froze on her tongue. The door closed quietly behind him, leaving her alone with the Duke and the ticking of the clock. Sebastian regarded her steadily. You suspect, he said, that my interest in you is only an extension of my interest in Ashbourne. She met his gaze, without flinching. It would not be unreasonable to think so. No, he agreed. It would not, but it would be incomplete. Silence stretched for a heartbeat, too, before he continued. I will not insult you by pretending that your position and your estate are of no consequence, he said. That would be untrue. Yet if land were all I sought, I could find it more easily elsewhere. There are heiresses eager to be chosen. You, Lady Cassandra, are not eager at all. A flicker of reluctant amusement stirred in her, quickly chased by wariness. You consider that an advantage? I consider it a sign that you will not surrender yourself lightly, he answered. And I have no wish for a wife who feels herself bartered. The word wife vibrated in the air between them like a plucked string. I am not asking for your hand, he said quietly. Not today, perhaps not for some time. I am asking for permission to come to know you better, and for the chance to show you that my regard is not built solely upon convenience. Cassandra searched his face, looking for arrogance, for calculation disguised as sincerity. She found composure, yes, and a certain guardedness, but also something like weariness and something else she could not yet name. Why me? She asked at last. You say you have options. Why fix your attention upon the woman everyone warns you will refuse? He hesitated then, the first true pause she had seen in his measured manner. When he spoke, his voice had shifted, softened at the edges. Because years ago, Sebastian said, before you knew my name, you changed the course of my life, and I have not forgotten it. Her breath caught. Years ago? I do not understand. No, he agreed. Not yet, but if you grant me the time I ask for, I will tell you everything. The ticking of the clock seemed suddenly very loud. Cassandra felt each beat like a tap against her ribs, measuring out the length of her silence. You speak as though there is some great debt between us, she said at last, her voice low. I cannot imagine what I may have done years ago to merit such language from a man I scarcely know. A man you scarcely know now, Sebastian corrected gently. There was a time when you knew nothing of me at all, and yet you acted with a courage and kindness I have not forgotten. Her mind rummaged through memories, charity visits, schoolroom projects, letters written and never signed. None of them seemed likely to touch the life of the Duke of Evermere. You are asking me, she said, to trust that there is some hidden thread between us, one that only you can see. In part, he admitted. But I would not ask you to step blindly into anything. Tell me what you require in order to feel safe. The question startled her. No one had ever asked what she required. Men spoke of what they could offer, what they expected, what they believed she should desire. I require, Cassandra said slowly, that my choice be real, not symbolic, that no agreement regarding land or title is made on the assumption that I will dutifully fall in line. If you and my father reach an understanding about Ashbourne, it must be able to stand even if I never become your wife." Sebastian inclined his head without hesitation. "Then that shall be the foundation. Any arrangement between your father and myself will be written in such a way that it does not depend upon your answer to me. I will have my counsel draw it up so that you may see it for yourself." She drew a breath. "And if I agree to allow you to know me better, what would that mean in practice? That I may call from time to time," he said, "that we may walk your grounds, speak without an audience when propriety allows, exchange letters when I am in the capital. No promises beyond the promise that I will be honest with you, even when the truth is uncomfortable." "Honesty can be a sharp instrument," Cassandra murmured. "Better a sharp truth than a dulled lie," he replied, "but I will wield it carefully." She almost smiled at that. Almost. "Very well. Your Grace," she said, "you may call, you may speak, you may attempt to prove that your regard is more than convenience, but I will not be hurried. I would not dare hurry you," he said quietly. "I have been waiting for years already. A little longer will not undo me." Before she could question that remark, the door opened and Lord Ashbourne re-entered, his expression politely inquiring. "I trust you two have not frightened one another," he said. "On the contrary, my lord," Sebastian replied. "We have reached an understanding. With your permission, I would like to be received here as a friend of the family. Our business arrangements can proceed on their own merits. As for more personal matters," he glanced at Cassandra, "we will move only at your daughter's pace." Lord Ashbourne's shoulders seemed to ease, just a fraction. "If that is agreeable to Cassandra, it is agreeable to me." "It is," she said quietly. After the Duke departed, leaving behind the faint scent of horses and cold air, Ashbourne Manor felt at once too small and too vast. Cassandra walked alone in the garden that afternoon, her cloak drawn close against the lingering chill, her thoughts circling like restless birds. Clara arrived the next day, bringing with her a flurry of news from the capital. "They are all half mad," her friend declared, throwing herself into a chair in Cassandra's sitting room. "The ton, I mean. The Duke of Evermere, the realm's most inscrutable bachelor, not only attends a ball, but dances with the most stubbornly unattached lady present, and then calls upon her the next morning. You might as well have set fire to the season." Cassandra winced. "That seems dramatic." "It is accurate," Clara insisted. "Half the mothers are in despair, the other half are furious, and a few are already weeping over the love story they have decided is unfolding. They say you have bewitched him." "I have done no such thing," Cassandra protested. "I have merely agreed to allow him to visit. Nothing more." Clara studied her. "And nothing less either. Do you like him?" The question landed with startling weight. Cassandra turned it over honestly before answering. "I respect him," she said. "He listens. He does not flatter. He speaks to me as though my mind is worth his time. I do not yet know if I like him. He is difficult to read." "Good," Clara said firmly. "Then you are not lost yet. Take your time. Let him work for each step he takes closer." Days passed, marked by letters from the capital about road plans and academy funding, and by the quiet arrival of Evermere's steward to walk the fields with Lord Ashbourne. Sebastian himself came twice more in that first fortnight, once for tea, once for a walk under a sky laden with spring clouds. During their second visit in the garden, he stopped beside an old oak and rested a hand against its rough bark. "I remember this tree," he said. Cassandra frowned. "How could you? You told me you had never visited Ashbourne before." "I have not," he replied, "and yet I remember it." His fingers tapped once, thoughtfully, against the trunk. "There are some memories that arrive before their explanations." It was an odd thing to say, and it left her with more questions than answers. That evening, as Cassandra prepared for bed, a soft knock sounded at her chamber door. A maid entered, holding a folded note on a silver tray. "This was delivered by a boy from the village, my lady," the maid said. "He said it was urgent, and for you alone." Cassandra dismissed her gently, then broke the plain seal. The handwriting inside was unfamiliar, hurried, almost shaky. "Beware the Duke of Evermere. He is not what he appears. Ask him what happened 8 years ago on the northern road, when a carriage overturned in the snow. If he tells you the truth, you will understand why he has truly come." Her hand trembled slightly as she read the final line. "And if he will not tell you, then you should not give him your heart." Cassandra read the anonymous note 3 times before she could move. The words seemed to deepen with each reading, as if fresh ink were seeping through the paper. "Beware the Duke of Evermere. He is not what he appears. Ask him what happened 8 years ago on the northern road, when a carriage overturned in the snow." 8 years ago. Northern road. Snow. Her first impulse was to stride straight to her father's study, unfold the paper before him, and demand that they send the Duke away if there was even a whisper of danger about him. but something in the wording held her back. There was no accusation of cruelty, no claim of scandal, only the insistence that there was a truth untold. And if he will not tell you, then you should not give him your heart. Her heart. Cassandra almost laughed at that, a sound with no amusement in it. She had not decided to give Sebastian anything. She had merely agreed to let him come and speak, to see if his regard was genuine. The idea that her heart might be in play felt at once premature and uncomfortably possible. She folded the note very carefully and slipped it into a small box on her dressing table, beneath a bundle of old letters tied with blue ribbon. For the moment, she told no one, not her father, not Clara. She needed time to think, to decide whether the anonymous warning deserved to be believed or simply examined. The Duke was due to visit again in 3 days' time to review a new set of plans for the proposed academy and the improvements to the tenant farms. Those 3 days stretched and folded strangely around her. At meals, she found herself drifting into silence, then snapping back to attention when her father spoke her name. In the evenings, she would open the box, look at the note, and close it again without rereading the words. They were already etched into her thoughts. On the morning of his visit, the sky was a clear, delicate blue with a hint of coolness still clinging to the air. Cassandra chose a simple walking gown in soft grey and pinned her hair with care. Though she told herself it did not matter how she looked, she would ask her questions regardless. The Evermere carriage arrived precisely on time. Sebastian entered the drawing room with his usual composed grace, but today Cassandra watched him differently. Not just as a potential suitor or ally, but as a man who might be carrying a story he had not yet told. "Lady Cassandra," he said, bowing. "Lord Ashbourne, thank you for seeing me again." "You are most welcome, Your Grace," her father replied. "Shall we look over the plans in the study, or would you prefer the garden?" "If Lady Cassandra is willing," Sebastian said, "I should like to walk the grounds. Much of what we discuss concerns the land itself. After all," she nodded, "the garden will do." They set out along the gravel path, the crunch of their footsteps punctuating the quiet. For a few minutes, they spoke only of practical matters, the positioning of new cottages, the potential site for the academy, the best way to ensure the tenants benefited from the changes. His answers were, as always, precise and thoughtfully considered, but the note in her room beat like a second pulse. At last, when they reached the small rise from which one could see the distant road threading between the fields, Cassandra stopped. "Your Grace," she said, "there is something I must ask you, and I must have the truth, even if you would rather not give it." He turned to face her fully. The breeze stirred his dark hair and his expression grew very still. "Then you shall have it," he said. "What do you wish to know?" She held his gaze. 8 years ago, on a northern road, a carriage overturned in the snow. What happened there?" For the first time since she had met him, Cassandra saw Sebastian visibly startled. The composure did not vanish, but it shifted, revealing a flicker of something raw beneath, surprise, and something closer to pain than she had ever seen in him. "Who told you about that?" he asked quietly. "Does it matter?" she replied. "Someone believes I should ask before I trust you. I am doing as they suggested. Will you answer me?" He was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the distant line of the road. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its usual smooth control. 8 years ago, Sebastian said slowly, I was not yet Duke. My father still lived, though he was unwell, and I was restless. I had been sent north on a minor diplomatic errand, one that felt meaningless compared to what I believed should be done. I left the main road in a fit of impatience, seeking a quicker route. The snow came sooner and heavier than anyone expected. The carriage slid into a ditch. No one was gravely harmed, but we were stranded miles from any inn. Cassandra listened, hardly daring to breathe. A small group from a nearby village came to help, he continued. Among them was a young woman who refused to be impressed by rank, especially rank I was attempting to conceal at the time. She spoke plainly about responsibility and the cost of impatience. She told me rather firmly that the choices of powerful men often landed on the shoulders of those with the least ability to bear them. A strange chill ran through Cassandra at those words, like the echo of a winter wind she did not remember. "And this young woman?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who was she?" For the first time, Sebastian's gaze met hers with no barriers at all. "She was you," he said. "You were visiting the village with your governess to deliver supplies. You had no idea who I was, but you changed the way I understood my duty. I have carried your words with me ever since." The world narrowed to the space between them, to the snowbound memory he offered, and the blankness where it should have been in her own mind. "I do not remember you," Cassandra said, her heart pounding. "Not at all." "I know," he he replied softly. And that, Cassandra, is part of why I did not speak of it sooner. The breeze tugged at Cassandra's skirts, carrying the faint, clean scent of turned earth from the distant fields. For a moment, she could almost imagine she stood in a winter landscape instead of under a mild spring sky. The ghost of snow, the sharpness of cold, a carriage half buried in white. But the memory would not form. It remained a hollow outline, nothing more. I do not remember you, she said again more quietly. I remember visiting villages with my governess. I remember snow once, and a cart that broke an axle, but not you. Sebastian nodded, as though he had expected as much. You were younger, he said. Not a child, but not yet fully out of the schoolroom. You were more concerned about blankets for the horses than titles for strangers. When I later asked who you were, they told me only that you were Lord Ashbourne's daughter, visiting from the south. That does not explain, Cassandra said slowly, why you did not speak of it when you called. Most men would have begun with such a story. Do you recall, my lady, the day you changed my life? It would have been an easy way to charm. His mouth twisted, not quite into a smile. Precisely. I did not wish it to be used in that way, nor did I wish to put you in the position of feeling grateful or obligated because of something you did in complete innocence. I have no desire to purchase your regard with a tale of my conscience. That sounds very noble, she said, watching him carefully. Almost too noble. I am many things, he replied. Entirely noble is not one of them. I have my share of pride and stubbornness, I assure you, but on this point I was determined. I wanted you to see me as I am now, not as the man you scolded in the snow. Despite herself, Cassandra felt a small spark of curiosity. Scolded? Oh, thoroughly, Sebastian said, and a true hint of amusement warmed his tone. You accused me of risking the lives of my coachman and footman for the sake of my impatience. You told me that if men in power refused to wait for safer roads, the rest of the world would always be cleaning up their overturned carriages. Her lips parted in astonishment. The words sounded exactly like her, and yet carried by his voice they felt like hearing a younger version of herself from a great distance. I said that? You did, he said. I was furious at the time. Later, I was grateful. I saw more clearly the pattern of my own choices. My life has been less impulsive since that day, more rooted in duty. There was a sincerity in his voice she could not easily dismiss, yet the warning in the anonymous note still tugged at her sleeve, insistent. You tell the story well, Cassandra said, well enough that I might almost be persuaded. Almost. She drew a breath. It was a choice, she realized, whether to keep the note hidden and nurse her suspicions alone, or to lay it between them and see what he did with the weight of it. She had demanded honesty. She could offer nothing less in return. 3 nights ago, she said, I received a message, anonymous, delivered by hand from the village. His gaze sharpened. What message? Without answering, she reached into the pocket sewn discreetly into her skirt and drew out the folded paper. She had begun carrying it with her that morning, as if some part of her had known this conversation could not wait. She held it out. Read it. Sebastian took the note with care, as though it might shatter. His eyes moved over the lines. Once, again, a third time. His jaw tightened slightly, and he exhaled through his nose, a sound too controlled to be called a sigh, yet close. Beware the Duke of Evermere, Cassandra quoted softly. He is not what he appears. Ask him what happened 8 years ago on the northern road, and if he will not tell you, then you should not give him your heart. He folded the paper slowly, his fingers steady. It seems, he said, that someone is very determined you and I should not trust one another. Is it untrue? She asked. Are you what you appear to be? He looked at her then, straight and unflinching. I am exactly what I appear to be, Cassandra. No more, no less. A man who has made mistakes. A man who has learned slowly and sometimes painfully that his choices echo beyond himself. A man who came here because a girl in the snow once told him the truth, and he has not been able to forget either the words or the courage it took to speak them. She held his gaze for a long moment. The note had warned her to ask. He had answered without evasion. Do you recognize the hand? She asked at last. The script? Sebastian hesitated, then nodded once. I believe so. Whose is it? He looked past her to the far line of trees, as if weighing not whether to speak but how much to say. When he answered, his voice carried a new heaviness. I cannot be entirely certain, he said, but I think this was written by a man who once served my family closely. A man who lost much when I chose a different path than the one he urged. If I am right, he has been nursing his resentment for years. And now? Cassandra asked softly. Now he chooses to involve me. Yes, Sebastian said, because he believes you are the one thing that could persuade me to bend away from the course I have set. The wind lifted a lock of hair at her temple. She did not brush it back. "And will you?" she asked. "Will you bend?" A slow, measured smile touched his mouth. Sad, perhaps, but steady. "No," he said, "not in the way he fears, but I will do something else he likely did not intend. I will tell you the rest of what happened after that day in the snow, and why my decision that winter made me an enemy he has never forgiven." He placed the folded note carefully back in her hand. "If you still wish to hear it," Sebastian added, "the next part of the story is not about overturned carriages at all. It is about what happened when I returned home, and the promise I refused to break, even when it cost me the favor of my own kin." The breeze tugged at Cassandra's skirts, carrying the faint, clean scent of turned earth from the distant fields. For a moment, she could almost imagine she stood in a winter landscape instead of under a mild spring sky, the ghost of snow, the sharpness of cold, a carriage half buried in white. But the memory would not form. It remained a hollow outline, nothing more. "I do not remember you," she said again, more quietly. "I remember visiting villages with my governess. I remember snow once, and a cart that broke an axle, but not you." Sebastian nodded, as though he had expected as much. "You were younger," he said. "Not a child, but not yet fully out of the schoolroom. You were more concerned about blankets for the horses than titles for strangers. When I later asked who you were, they told me only that you were Lord Ashbourne's daughter, visiting from the south." "That does not explain," Cassandra said slowly, "why you did not speak of it when you called. Most men would have begun with such a story. Do you recall, my lady, the day you changed my life? It would have been an easy way to charm." His mouth twisted, not quite into a smile. "Precisely. I did not wish it to be used in that way, nor did I wish to put you in the position of feeling grateful or obligated because of something you did in complete innocence. I have no desire to purchase your regard with a tale of my conscience." "That sounds very noble," she said, watching him carefully. "Almost too noble." "I am many things," he replied. "Entirely noble is not one of them. I have my share of pride and stubbornness, I assure you. But on this point, I was determined. I wanted you to see me as I am now, not as the man you scolded in the snow." Despite herself, Cassandra felt a small spark of curiosity. "Scolded? Oh, thoroughly," Sebastian said, and a true hint of amusement warmed his tone. "You accused me of risking the lives of my coachman and footman for the sake of my impatience. You told me that if men in power refused to wait for safer roads, the rest of the world would always be cleaning up their overturned carriages." Her lips parted in astonishment. The words sounded exactly like her, and yet carried by his voice, they felt like hearing a younger version of herself from a great distance. "I said that. You did," he said. "I was furious at the time. Later I was grateful. I saw more clearly the pattern of my own choices. My life has been less impulsive since that day, more rooted in duty." There was a sincerity in his voice she could not easily dismiss, yet the warning in the anonymous note still tugged at her sleeve, insistent. "You tell the story well," Cassandra said, "well enough that I might almost be persuaded." "Almost?" She drew a breath. It was a choice, she realized, whether to keep the note hidden and nurse her suspicions, alone, or to lay it between them and see what he did with the weight of it. She had demanded honesty. She could offer nothing less in return. "3 nights ago," she said, "I received a message, anonymous, delivered by hand from the village." His gaze sharpened. "What message?" Without answering, she reached into the pocket sewn discreetly into her skirt and drew out the folded paper. She had begun carrying it with her that morning, as if some part of her had known this conversation could not wait. She held it out. "Read it." Sebastian took the note with care, as though it might shatter. His eyes moved over the lines, once, again, a third time. His jaw tightened slightly, and he exhaled through his nose, a sound too controlled to be called a sigh, yet close. "Beware the Duke of Evermere," Cassandra quoted softly. "He is not what he appears. Ask him what happened 8 years ago on the northern road. And if he will not tell you, then you should not give him your heart." He folded the paper slowly, his fingers steady. "It seems," he said, "that someone is very determined you and I should not trust one another." "Is it untrue?" she asked. "Are you what you appear to be?" He looked at her then, straight and unflinching. "I am exactly what I appear to be, Cassandra. No more, no less. A man who has made mistakes. A man who has learned slowly and sometimes painfully that his choices echo beyond himself. A man who came here because a girl in the snow once told him the truth, and he has not been able to forget either the words or the courage it took to speak them." She held his gaze for a long moment. The note had warned her to ask. He had answered without evasion. "Do you recognize the hand?" she asked at last. "The script?" Sebastian hesitated, then nodded once. "I believe so." "Whose is it?" He looked past her to the far line of trees, as if weighing not whether to speak, but how much to say. When he answered, his voice carried a new heaviness. "I cannot be entirely certain," he said, "but I think this was written by a man who once served my family closely, a man who lost much when I chose a different path than the one he urged. If I am right, he has been nursing his resentment for years. And now?" Cassandra asked softly. "Now he chooses to involve me." "Yes," Sebastian said, "because he believes you are the one thing that could persuade me to bend away from the course I have set." The wind lifted a lock of hair at her temple. She did not brush it back. "And will you?" she asked. "Will you bend?" A slow, measured smile touched his mouth. Sad, perhaps, but steady. "No," he said, "not in the way he fears, but I will do something else he likely did not intend. I will tell you the rest of what happened after that day in the snow, and why my decision that winter made me an enemy he has never forgiven." He placed the folded note carefully back in her hand. "If you still wish to hear it," Sebastian added, "the next part of the story is not about overturned carriages at all. It is about what happened when I returned home, and the promise I refused to break, even when it cost me the favor of my own kin." Cassandra closed her fingers around the folded note, feeling the slight rasp of the paper against her palm. Somewhere in the distance a lark called, bright and high, as if unaware that two lives were quietly shifting on the path below. "I still wish to hear it," she said. "All of it, if you will tell me." Sebastian inclined his head as though accepting a charge. They began walking again, slower this time, the gravel crunching softly beneath their feet. "When I returned from the north," he said, "my father's health had worsened. The physicians spoke in careful phrases, but the meaning was clear. It was only a matter of time before the title passed to me. My uncle, my father's younger brother, had been managing certain affairs in the meantime. He is a capable man, but he has always believed that power exists to protect itself first, and others only when convenient." Cassandra listened, her gaze on the path ahead, though her thoughts were fixed on his words. "At that time," Sebastian continued, "Evermere's council favored an alliance with a family whose fortunes were on the rise. They commanded a great deal of trade, but their treatment of their workers was harsh. There were reports of evictions, of rents increased beyond reason, of schools closed because they did not turn immediate profit." "And your uncle supported them?" Cassandra asked quietly. "He did more than support them," Sebastian said. "He had already begun informal negotiations. A marriage was suggested between myself and their eldest daughter. She is not a cruel woman, but she has been raised to think of people as pieces on a board. To her, that is simply how the world is ordered." Cassandra felt a flicker of something she did not wish to name. "And you?" "I returned from the snow," he said, "with a stranger's words in my mind. The choices of powerful men often land on the shoulders of those least able to bear them. I looked at the reports, numbers on a page that represented real lives. I looked at my father, too ill to fight the current he had set in motion, and I realized that if I stepped into his place and simply continued, I would be choosing convenience over conscience." He paused beside a low stone wall, resting his hand on the rough surface as though grounding himself. "I refused the alliance," he said simply, formally, publicly. "I declared that Evermere would not tie itself to any house that prospered by stripping its people bare. I declared as well that our lands would be governed by a different standard, that we would invest in schools and roads even when the profit was not immediate, that rents would not be raised without cause, that our prosperity would not be bought with the misery of those beneath us." Cassandra imagined the scene, a younger Sebastian standing before a room of older men, their faces stiff with disapproval, his father watching in silence. "And your uncle?" she asked. "Was furious," Sebastian said, though there was no bitterness in the word, only weary recognition. "He believed I had thrown away a powerful alliance for the sake of sentiment. He was not alone in that opinion. But one man was more angered than the rest. My father's chief advisor at the time, a man named Edmund Varro. The name felt sharp in the air. He had worked for years to secure that alliance," Sebastian continued. "He believed it would lift our influence above all rivals. When I cancelled it, I did more than wound his pride. I destroyed the future he had planned for himself as the architect of my success. I dismissed him from my service. When I discovered he had gone behind my back to continue negotiations." Cassandra's eyes widened. "You dismissed him?" "I did," Sebastian said. "Not publicly, not cruelly. He received a generous pension, but he lost his position, his access, his power. For a man like Varro, that was a blow he could not forgive. If he has written to you, I do not doubt his warning feels very satisfying to him." She opened her hand and looked down at the folded paper. It seemed suddenly smaller, less like a revelation and more like a tool in someone else's long-standing quarrel. "So," she said slowly. "The terrible secret of the Northern Road is that I once scolded you, and you later chose conscience over convenience." A wry smile touched his mouth. "When you say it that way, it sounds almost uninteresting." "It is not uninteresting," Cassandra replied. "It is heavy, the kind of choice that lingers." They walked in silence for a few steps. At last she asked, "Why tell me all this now? You could have denied the note. You could have dismissed it as nonsense and insisted I'd trust your word alone." "Because," Sebastian said quietly, "if we are ever to build anything together, friendship, partnership, or something more, it must stand on ground where nothing important is hidden. I would rather you know the worst that can be honestly said of me than be charmed by only half the story." She studied him. "And is this the worst?" He hesitated, then answered with disarming candor. "No. The worst is that I can be stubborn to the point of folly, that I work too much, that I forget to rest, that I do not always see when those around me are weary until they finally fall. But those are failings I am prepared to let you discover at your own pace." Despite herself, Cassandra laughed softly. The sound loosened something in her chest. "The anonymous note spoke of my heart," she said, "as though it were some jewel I might carelessly misplace." "It is not a jewel," Sebastian said. "It is far more dangerous than that. A jewel can be locked away. A heart, once given, alters the one who receives it. That is why I will never ask for yours lightly." Her breath caught at the quiet intensity of his tone. For a moment, neither of them moved. The path stretched ahead, sun-dappled and uncertain. "Then for now," she said at last, "let us speak not of hearts but of roads and schools and promises. If what you say is true, Your Grace, then we are at the very least traveling in the same direction." Relief, subtle but unmistakable, softened his features. "Then we shall walk a little further together and see where the road leads." Neither of them noticed as they turned back toward the house. The figure watching from the distant line of trees, a man with sharp eyes and a face lined more by resentment than by age, noting every step they took side by side. Summer brushed softly against Ashbourne, turning the fields a deeper green and laying gold along the edges of the hedges. The first stones for the new academy had arrived, piled neatly near the chosen site, waiting for the workmen who would soon begin. Cassandra stood at the window of the morning room watching two boys from the village race a cart down the lane, their laughter drifting faintly up to her. It comforted her to know that in a few years those same boys might be walking to a proper school instead of carrying heavy loads from dawn till dusk. A knock sounded at the door. Lord Ashbourne entered with a letter in his hand and an expression she had come to recognize: cautious hope. "From Evermere?" she asked. "From the capital," he said, offering her the paper. "From the Royal Council, but I suspect Evermere's influence is folded into every line." She broke the seal and read quickly. Her eyes widened. "We are invited," she said, "you and I, to attend a special session of the council. They wish to hear more about the model academy and the road improvements, and," she swallowed, "and they ask that I speak about the charitable work we have already done in the north." Her father's voice was gentle. "You have always wanted them to listen to such matters, my dear." "Yes," she said, fingers tightening around the letter. "I did not expect they would ask to hear from me." 2 weeks later, Cassandra found herself once more in the capital, though this time not for a ball. The council chamber was grand in a different way from the royal pavilion. Stone and tapestries instead of crystal and silk, maps on the quai, walls, a great table at the center where decisions that shaped lives were made, often by hands that never touched the soil they discussed. Sebastian met them at the entrance, bowing to Lord Ashbourne, then to Cassandra. His eyes lingered on her a moment longer than courtesy required, and there was a quiet warmth there that steadied her. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Your experience will carry more weight than any number of reports I could." "Present. I am not certain I will be able to speak," Cassandra confessed. "My hands are already shaking." "Let them shake," he answered softly. "No good thing has ever depended on perfect composure." The session began. The king listened from his high chair as Sebastian laid out the proposed changes: the road routes, the academy, the investment in tenant farms, the long-term hope of lifting entire regions rather than merely extracting from them. Much of this, Sebastian said at last, was sharpened by the perspective of someone who has seen the needs of the provinces not from above, but from their very doorsteps. "With your Majesty's permission, Lady Cassandra Ashbourne will speak to that." Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Cassandra rose, smoothing her skirts. Her heart thudded, but her voice, when it came, was steady. She spoke not of grand visions, but of small, simple things. children sharing one primer between three, mothers who could read a recipe but not a contract, the way a single winter of failed crops could undo 10 years of careful saving. She did not dramatize, she did not plead, she simply told the truth. When she finished, the chamber was quiet for a heartbeat, then filled with a low murmur of thoughtful voices. Afterwards, as the council adjourned, men who had never glanced at her during previous seasons now inclined their heads and asked her brief, respectful questions. Cassandra answered as best she could, surprised to find that, once she had begun, speaking had become easier. In a smaller antechamber later, while refreshments were being served, she slipped aside for a moment of quiet. Papers lay stacked on a side table, some neatly ordered, others carelessly left. One in particular caught her eye, the Evermere crest at the top, her own name. Visible halfway down the page, she hesitated only a moment before reaching for it. If it was official business concerning Ashbourne, she had a right to know. It was a memorandum addressed to the council from Edmund Varro. The script was careful, formal, the tone outwardly respectful, but beneath the polite phrases, a pattern emerged. Concern that the Duke of Evermere's judgment was unduly influenced by personal sentiment, that the proposed investments might serve as an extravagant gesture intended to impress a particular lady of modest estate, that philanthropic language was being used to disguise favoritism. And there, in the middle of the page, her name, Lady Cassandra Ashbourne, though no doubt sincere in her charitable zeal, has become a symbol His Grace is eager to display as proof of his softer inclinations. One must question whether such emotional entanglements cloud a statesman's view of the realm as a whole. The words blurred for a moment. Cassandra set the paper down very carefully, a symbol, a display, proof that he could appear softer. She heard footsteps behind her and turned quickly. Sebastian stood in the doorway, his gaze moving from her face to the memorandum on the table. He went very still. "You were not meant to see that," he said quietly. "So much is becoming clear," Cassandra replied, surprised at how calm she sounded. "Tell me, Your Grace, when you brought me here, was it because you believed in my voice, or because you wished to show the council that you possess a convenient heart?" His brows drew together. "You cannot truly think I can truly read," she said, touching the edge of the paper with one gloved fingertip. "And it appears I am very useful to you, whether I am myself or merely a symbol." The confusion and hurt flickering across his features almost undid her, but she held her ground. "Cassandra," he said, taking a step toward her, "if you will allow me to explain—" "For once," she interrupted softly, "I do not wish to be explained. I wish to consider what I have seen." She curtsied with chilly grace and moved past him, out into the corridor where the shadows stretched long across the floor. She did not see the way his hand tightened briefly at his side, or the expression that crossed his face, a mixture of frustration, fear, and a deeper, older grief. The ride back to Ashbourne after the council session seemed both shorter and longer than Cassandra remembered. The countryside blurred past the carriage windows in shades of green and gold, but her mind was fixed on the stark black ink of Edmund Varro's memorandum, a symbol, proof that he could appear softer. She had stood in that chamber and offered her hard-earned observations, her fears, her hopes, believing they were being weighed for their own worth. Now she could not shake the image of herself as a carefully arranged ornament, placed at the table to polish another man's reputation. Her father watched her in quiet intervals. At last, when the silence had stretched too long, he said gently, "You spoke well, my dear." The king listened. The ministers listened. Evermere was clearly proud. "He had reason to be," Cassandra replied, her gaze on her gloved hands. "It seems I have become a very useful example." Lord Ashbourne's brows knit. "Useful to whom?" "To everyone who wishes to appear generous without risking anything of themselves," she said. "To those who enjoy the idea of caring for the provinces, as long as someone else carries the weight of genuine feeling." He studied her for a long moment. "Did someone say this to you?" "In a manner of speaking," she answered. "I saw a document, a memorandum from a man named Edmund Varro." At the name, her father's expression darkened with recognition. "Varro. I remember him from old days at court, sharp as a knife and about as warm. He has never forgiven Evermere for dismissing him." "He has not forgiven him," Cassandra agreed, "and he is attempting to wound him through me." She gave a humorless little smile. The effort was not wasted. Ashbourne reached across and laid a hand over hers. "Cassandra, listen to me. There will always be those who twist any good deed into selfishness. The question is not whether they speak, but whether what they say is true. Do you, in your own judgment, believe that the Duke brought you there only to prove he had a heart?" Her throat tightened. "I do not know. I thought I did. I thought he respected my mind, but now I wonder whether I have." as simply been convenient. Her father did not argue. He simply held her hand until the carriage rattled into the familiar drive of Ashbourne Manor. Days passed. Letters arrived from the capital, one outlining the schedule for further council discussions, another from a minister praising her clarity of thought, and one in a hand she knew at once that remained unopened on her writing desk. Sebastian Seal looked back at her each morning and each night. Cassandra told herself she needed time to think before reading his words, but the truth was simpler and sharper. She was afraid of what she might feel if she allowed his voice onto the page. Hurt was easier to maintain in silence. Clara came as soon as she could, sweeping into Cassandra's sitting room with a rustle of skirts and an expression of fierce concern. "You look as though someone has taken away your favorite book and replaced it with a ledger," she declared. "Tell me everything at once." Cassandra told her carefully at first, then with increasing honesty. The note, the story of the snow, the confession about Varro, the memorandum, the cutting phrase about symbols and sentiment. When she finished, Clara sat very still. "And what did he say when you showed it to him?" her friend asked at last. "I did not show it to him," Cassandra admitted. "He saw me reading it. He tried to explain. I told him I wished to consider what I had seen and left." Clara's eyes widened. "You left him standing there?" "Yes." "Cassandra," Clara said gently, "you once scolded a stranger in a snowstorm for failing to consider the impact of his choices on others. Are you entirely certain you have considered the impact of yours?" The words stung because they were not unfair. Cassandra turned them over, slowly. Before she could answer, knock sounded. The maid announced, "A gentleman to see Lord Ashbourne, my lady. A Mr. Varro from the capital." Clara's brows shot up. "Well, the wolf steps out of the trees at last." Cassandra's first instinct was to refuse to see him, but curiosity, dangerous, necessary curiosity, rose up. After a moment she said, "Ask Mr. Varro if he will spare a few minutes to speak with me before he meets with my father." He came into the smaller sitting room with a measured stride, his clothes impeccably neat, his hair silvering at the temples in a way that suggested calculation more than time. His eyes, sharp and appraising, took in Cassandra, then flicked briefly to Clara before dismissing her presence as one might a piece of furniture. "Lady Cassandra," he said, bowing just enough to be polite, "it is an honor." "I doubt that," Cassandra replied, her tone mild, "but you are welcome to sit." He did so, arranging his cuffs with fastidious care. "I came to speak with your father about certain concerns regarding Evermere's latest schemes. I did not expect the added pleasure of a conversation with the lady who has so captured his imagination." The possessive pronoun was deliberate. Cassandra heard it and tucked away the evidence. "You write a convincing memorandum, Mr. Varro," she said. "Your doubts about the Duke's motives are thorough." His eyes narrowed a fraction. "So you have seen it? Good. Then you understand the danger of allowing sentiment to drive policy. He parades you before the council, and they swoon over his newly discovered compassion. Meanwhile, his attention is diverted from alliances that would truly secure the realm's stability, such as the one he refused with your friends," Cassandra said quietly. Color touched Varro's cheekbones. "A youthful mistake," he snapped. "One that cost us dearly." "Us," she repeated. "Or you?" His lips thinned. "You think me bitter, Lady Cassandra. Perhaps I am. Bitter that a man I once guided now squanders opportunities to strengthen his house in favor of flattering peasants and indulging ladies with charitable hobbies." Clara made a faint, strangled sound but held her tongue. Cassandra kept her gaze steady. "And yet, for all his supposed indulgence, he has refused to tie his reforms to my compliance. The contracts for Ashbourne stand whether I accept any personal offer from him or not." Varro's eyes flashed. "For now. But men change their minds when hearts become involved. Believe me, I have watched it happen." Cassandra leaned back slightly, studying him as she might a puzzle whose missing pieces had just fallen into place. The note, the memorandum, the wounded pride. This was not a man concerned solely for the realm. This was a man consumed by the insult of being set aside. "Tell me, Mr. Varro," she said with cool courtesy, "if you believed I was merely a symbol to Evermere, why warn me at all?" "Because," he said, his voice suddenly sharp, "if you withdraw, his position weakens. The council will see his plans for the sentimental gestures they are. A man can be humbled in many ways, Lady Cassandra. Sometimes the most effective is to remove the ornament he has chosen to display." The word ornament struck her like a slap. Not because she had never been dismissed before, but because in that moment she understood his strategy completely. "You would use me," she said quietly, "to punish him." He smiled without warmth. I would use whatever the world offers, my lady. That is what power requires. The door opened then, and Lord Ashbourne entered, his face polite but cool. Mr. Varro, he said, I believe you wish to speak with me. Cassandra rose. No doubt he does, Papa. You will of course listen, and then you will decide whether the realm is better served by a man who calls schoolrooms sentiment, or one who is willing to bear the cost of building them. As she left the room, her heart was no calmer, but it was clearer. Varro had shown her exactly how little he valued her, and how closely he tied her worth to Sebastian's humiliation. Whatever the Duke's faults might be, they were not that. Back in her chamber, Cassandra at last broke the seal on the letter from Evermere. Several pages fell open, covered in his familiar hand. At the very top of the first sheet, one line stood alone. If you wish me never to call again, write only that single sentence, and I will honor it. But before you decide, I beg you to know what I intended when I asked you to stand beside me in the council chamber. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the first page. If you wish me never to call again, write only that single sentence, and I will honor it. Cassandra read the line twice. There was no bargaining in it, no plea for a second chance wrapped in flowers, only a door quietly offered that she might close if she wished. She read on. Sebastian's hand was firm but not flowery. He spoke first of the council, how he had watched her stand and speak, how the room had shifted when they realized she would not be coaxed into dramatics or sentiment, only truth. I asked you to stand beside me, he wrote, not to soften my image, but to sharpen their understanding. They do not trust my reports from the provinces because they think a duke can only see numbers. They needed to hear from someone who has stood in cold kitchens and crowded schoolrooms. He did not pretend he had no personal motive. If I were only a statesman, I would have chosen a scholar whose name they already knew, he admitted. I am not only a statesman, I am a man who has admired your mind since the day you scolded me in the snow. Yes, I wanted them to see you, to hear you, to recognize what I already knew, that your judgment is as fine as any man at that table. Cassandra's throat tightened. He wrote of Varro then, plainly, without excuses. How the man had already tried to undermine him, how he had expected more attacks but had not anticipated that the blade would be aimed at Cassandra's confidence. It was my failure not to shield you from that, he said, not by hiding you, but by preparing you. I underestimated how eagerly he would twist your courage into ornament. For that I am sorry. The last page was shorter. I do not ask you to ignore what you read. I ask only that you weigh it against what you have seen in my actions. If you decide that I have used you, that my admiration is merely convenient, write the sentence I offered. You must not call again. If, however, you believe there is still a path we might walk together, as allies, as friends, perhaps one day as more, then send no grand reply. Only allow me to come, and I will tell you the rest with nothing between us but the truth. There was no signature, flourish. Only his name written small at the bottom, Sebastian Thorne. Cassandra sat for a long time, the pages resting on her knee. Clara found her thus, eyes unfocused, letter open. Well, Clara asked softly, does he defend himself like a scoundrel or like a fool in love? Neither, Cassandra said. He defends himself like a man who is trying very hard to be better than he once was. She told Clara the essence of the letter. When she finished, her friend's eyes were shining. You are afraid, Clara said gently, that if you say yes to him you will vanish the way your mother did, that you will wake one morning and realize your thoughts have become decorations in your own house. Cassandra swallowed. Yes, and yet, Clara went on, how many men of rank would put in writing that you may stop them with a single sentence? How many would insist their contracts stand, even if you refuse their suit? You turned down every suitor who treated you as a prize to be won. Perhaps it is time to see what happens when a man offers himself as a partner to be tested. The words settled into her like seeds into waiting soil. That evening, Cassandra did not write the sentence he had offered. She wrote only 3 other words on a small, carefully folded note. You may call. She sent it with a trusted messenger. Sebastian arrived 2 days later without fanfare, in a simpler carriage than usual. The butler announced him. Lord Ashbourne greeted him with formal courtesy, and then, with a glance at his daughter, withdrew to the study. They met in the garden, beneath the old oak he had touched before. The summer breeze stirred the leaves, sending shifting patterns of light across the path. Thank you for allowing me to come, he said. If, after this conversation, you decide I must Stay away, I will go, but I could not let your last impression of me be a memorandum written by a man who despises both of us. Cassandra nodded. Then let us speak plainly. Plainly, then, he agreed. Ask me what you most fear to ask. She drew a breath. When you look at me in those council rooms, do you see a woman whose mind you trust, or a useful ornament to prove that you have acquired a conscience? His answer came without hesitation. I see the only person in that chamber who has ever spoken to me as if I were a man first and a title second. I see the reason I refuse alliances that would fatten our coffers while starving our people. I see someone who would question me if I began to drift toward convenience, and who would not hesitate to remind me of an overturned carriage in the snow. His gaze did not waver. If I wanted an ornament, I could have any number of delicate, agreeable ladies who would never argue. I came to you because you argue, because you think, because you say no. The corner of her mouth tugged upward despite herself. You have certainly had the opportunity to hear me say it. I have, he said. And yet, selfishly, I hope that one day you might choose to say yes. Silence settled between them, not empty but waiting. I cannot promise, Cassandra said slowly, that I will never doubt you. I have spent so long defending myself with refusal that the habit does not easily loosen. I would be more concerned, Sebastian replied, if you promised never to doubt. Doubt keeps men honest. My terms remain, she continued. Any arrangement regarding land must stand independent of any understanding between us. I will not be a condition in a contract. That is already done, he said. You will see every clause yourself. And if I should marry you, Cassandra said, her heartbeat suddenly loud in her ears. It must be as a partner, not an ornament. I will walk the estates. I will read the reports. I will disagree with you when I think you are wrong. A slow, almost disbelieving smile unfolded across his face. Lady Cassandra Ashbourne, he said quietly, if you give me that honor, I will consider myself the most fortunate man in the realm. Not because I will have taken a wife at last, but because I will have gained the sharpest ally I could wish for. Her breath caught. You are asking me now? I am asking you, he said, not for an immediate answer, but for permission to ask in earnest, to court you openly, with your father's knowledge, with no quiet pressure, no whispered expectation. When you are ready to answer, it will be because you have measured the life we might build and found it worthy. She thought of Varro's cold eyes, of Clara's fierce loyalty, of her father's tired hope. She thought of children in new-built schoolrooms, of tenants whose futures would be changed, not just patched. She thought, too, of a girl in the snow, unafraid to scold a stranger. I will not marry you because the realm expects it, Cassandra said softly. I will not marry you to save Ashbourne, or to silence gossip, or to reward you for good deeds. Then why would you? He asked, almost a whisper. She met his gaze, feeling the last stubborn pieces of her fear shift into a new shape. Because, she said, if I say yes, it will be to a man who has already shown he can hear the word no and still respect the woman who speaks it. The relief that crossed his face was so open, so unguarded, that for a moment he looked younger than she had ever seen him. Then we are agreed, he said. No further decisions today, only this. We will walk this road together and see if in time your heart chooses to stay beside mine. Years later they would look back on that first dance and smile at how small it had seemed at the time. The academy rose, stone by stone. Roads spread like careful lines drawn toward a fairer future. Ashbourne's tenants prospered. The realm whispered, judged, predicted, and then, gradually, accepted. When Cassandra finally did say yes, on a day much quieter than any ball, with only her father and Clara as witnesses, it was not because the most powerful duke in the realm had asked. It was because the man behind the title had waited, listened, and proven that he wanted not a symbol, but a partner. And for every dance they shared afterwards, in grand halls or empty gardens, he never once forgot that it had all begun with a woman who had spent years saying no, until she met someone who understood what her yes was worth.